Hello everybody, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri Today I'm actually working on a demon, but more of a steampunk style demon. So it's slightly different than what you've normally seen me do, and in this case I actually wanted to draw the character flying because I hadn't drawn any characters that were flying in the air. So for me, this was obviously something new that I hadn't done before, that I wanted to try out, see if I could pull it off. And I think it turned out actually pretty well. Now, I didn't have any plan for this image before I started working on it. It was very spontaneous. I didn't do any referencing either. I do normally reference poses and anatomy before I start a piece, but in this case I didn't do that. So a lot of this was just on the fly. I was applying knowledge that I had gained from previous drawings to create this one. So in this case, because I was drawing character flying, I figured that the pose would probably be more of a Spider-Man-like pose, because Spider-Man in general, he's normally dropping from larger heights, and he would kind of have that type of pose if the character was maybe preparing to land. So that's the reason why I decided to go with a pose that looks like he's actually landing. I used to read Spider-Man comics when I was a kid, and that's where I got the inspiration for the pose for this character from. Now, that being said, I was also trying to apply some of the knowledge I had gained from my baby dragon drawing. So I was using the information I gained from how bat wings are actually designed in order to come up with this concept for a character. Now, because I did draw something cute last week, I wanted to go back to my normal style, which is not cute items. Although the baby dragon was fun, I still like to draw armor and have dark themes to my artwork. So in this case, I decided to go back to that. Now, you've seen me do many times before. I always start off with a really rough line drawing. And in this stage, everything is really rough. I'm not solidifying any lines. Once I start actually solidifying the lines, normally I actually do that with painting itself. So everything is very loose until I actually start painting. That's when I do start tightening up my drawing. So right now, I'm actually just looking for the general concept of the character. What is the character wearing, the pose, the composition. All those are important factors in this case, and that's what I'm concentrating on at the moment. Now, I did find that the character's pose was too much in the center. Also, it was too straight up and down, so all I did was tilt the character. You did see me briefly draw a building. I was trying to figure out whether or not this pose would work in front of a building. However, the perspective is not correct to do so, so I decided to go against it. Now, I'm actually starting off with a white background. Normally I start with a grayish background. There's actually a reason for this. Because I deal with a lot of printing for my pieces, this is a method I'll use if I am changing the opacities of my brush. In this method, I actually switch between a black and a white background. That allows me to fill in more of the character. It also keeps the character from being too transparent in certain areas by doing this. Because generally when you're doing that, you add your basic shadows, like really rough shadows, and then you switch. Once you've added the actual dark portions of the character, then you switch to a black background. And what that allows you to do is concentrate on the highlights afterwards. So in this case, that's what I'm doing. I'm working out the main shadow areas for the character with a very bright background so that I can just focus on the shadows. I'm not focusing on any other detail at the moment. So it's just a slightly different workflow than what you see me do. I don't generally use this technique too often, but it does help a lot if you're doing printing afterwards of this character, because most of the character is already filled in. So it's a little bit easier to isolate the character afterwards. Now, as you notice, I'm using a lot of contrast lines in order to bump up the detail of the armor, something I do very often. You don't need generally too much detail in this case for this character. I'm actually only, for the character itself, I only use the default soft brush for it. The main reason why is normally I use the texture brushes for anything that's close up, or for clouds, just because they do cut down the drawing time. But in this case, because the character is in air, but he's also not directly in front of us, well, he is in front of us, he's just not too close to the viewer, you can get away with not adding as much detail. In fact, you probably wouldn't want to add as much detail as the foreground element, which is closest to you. The closer the objects are to you, the more detail they generally have. So because I wasn't going to be adding as much detail as the foreground elements, I did use only the soft brush to ensure that I didn't add too much detail to the character. So that's one way of applying brushes that I do actually use fairly often, is if I know something is in the distance and I'm afraid of adding too much detail and overdoing it, then what I'll do is I'll just change to a very specific brush that I know forces me to reduce the amount of detail in that object. It is better to learn it the normal way, which is just use a normal brush and just slowly add the detail up. But because I do have a lot of time restraints, especially with the new website in this case, I did opt for using brushes for different areas that were better suited to how close the viewer would be seeing the character. Once again, because the character isn't directly or isn't the closest object to us at the moment, I'm keeping the details in the face fairly simple. I'm not going overly detailed in the body or the armor design either, because you wouldn't see as much of that detail from this distance for this character. Now, most of my armor designs that I do come up for the characters are actually based off my past experience actually building my own version of armor. I don't use metal per se, but I do use alternative material normally to build costumes for Halloween. But the reason why I do build these costumes, though, is because it allows me to figure out structurally how armor would have to be constructed and how this would affect my drawing later on. I do sculpting, and I do a couple of other mediums you haven't seen me actually show on my videos yet. But working in both traditional 2D and 3D mediums, as well as digital, allows me a lot more flexibility. It also allows me to understand how objects would actually be properly constructed. It is very important to understand how these items are constructed when you're drawing them, because if you don't understand how they're actually constructed, then you won't be drawing it normally correctly. That's why it is important to do referencing if you aren't familiar with an object. Now, I do favor certain armor designs just because I do know that they're more functional. However, in this case, I did want to have most of the character's body showing, so I did use this style of armor instead. So it's a slightly different style than what you've seen me do, but it's still fairly close to the normal style. Now, because this is a mixture of a steampunk / demon character, I did want to have a membrane stretching out on the wings, because I did decide the moment I drew the wings that I was going to make the wings mechanical. So for this reason, I did try to make sure that they did look very mechanical in the way they were constructed. You could see gears, you could see supports, and that's what I went into. And I did take those things into consideration when I was actually drawing the wings for this character. Now what you just saw me do is I actually just copied the wing onto the other side. The reason why I did that, once again, time constraints, so I don't have time to fully work it out separately. That, and I know that the lighting in this case would be the same because the lighting is coming from behind the character. Normally, this technique you have to be a little wary of, because normally there is significant changes in the overall lighting that would occur. But because the lighting is coming from behind the character in this case, I don't necessarily have to worry about that. Now, for this demon character, what I did decide to do in the end, instead of doing a building, is I decided to have almost zombie-like hands reaching up towards the character, and him actually absorbing their essence and life force. Because he is a demon, technically he doesn't have to survive technically just off living organisms. In this case, these are actually creatures, undead creatures that have been brought back artificially, but he's still able to consume them as energy. So this is the general idea for this character. It's not something I have done before, so I figured it would be a fun thing to try out. I did try something similar with the Necromancer character, but it didn't turn out. This drawing did turn out significantly better, so I was very happy with this drawing. And as you can see, I just added a basic blue overlay. The reason why I did this in this case is because I wanted all the shadows to be more on the blue range. And the easiest way to do that, because most of the drawing itself is dark, is to simply add a color overlay of blue. And that's what I did do. Now I did once again want the character to stand out more than the zombies. So for this reason I did light the hands and arms darker than the rest of the character. Now, because the character is the main focal point in this piece, I did add that extra bit of color behind the character, and also reinforce some of the shadows as well, just to make sure that character did stand out from the rest of the piece. Now, although the zombies do have a certain amount of detail, they're actually still fairly simplified, so they're not overly detailed either. So, this is Yasmin from Yarkspiri.fantasyart.com. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you, and take care.